Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everybody in the Zendo again. It feels like it's been such a long time. So we're glad to see you as a new person. So we want to welcome. So we'll have some time afterwards to chat as well. But again, good morning, everybody. This is our second Sunday discussion, and it's usually our community practice. And we set that up a little bit differently than we have in the past. So it's not just a lecture and your feedback, et cetera. It's about really looking at the six perfections. We set up a website on our ASZC website. It's also up under teachings, and it's called the community discussion or practice discussion. And all that information that we're going to be sharing will be there, including the talks and also the links to Hojo Sensei. Thank you. His past writings on the six perfections. So that's kind of some of the background. So in December, Shinjin Sensei really kind of kicked it off for us. And we talked about what the perfections were, how they really related to the precepts, and then how does it relate to everyday life. So we want to continue that discussion, and we're going to kind of break it down into the different perfections. We're going to start this month with generosity and what that really looks like. And then after he speaks a little bit about generosity, I'll share some of our information from our ancestors and our current teachers. And then we'll try to talk what that looks like from a perspective of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that's kind of how we break down things here. So let's get it kicked off. Hojo Sensei, if you'll open it up with our Dharma opening verses. And it's here, unless you don't have those. But we'll get started. Thank you.
Surpass profound and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth.
And just as a reminder, folks, we're going to use this book, The Six Perfections by David S. Wright, as our kind of foundational text that we're using for the discussion. So it has readings on each of the paramitas, and you'll hear us kind of reference that. So again, I'm going to kick it off with Shinjin Sensei, and then we'll get started and hopefully have a really fruitful discussion today.
Okay, I'm going to do more than reference this. I'm actually going to read directly from it. We started last month, we talked about the kind of an introduction to what the paramitas were, and then we went we didn't go very in depth into all six of them, but we were going to divide that up over the next couple of months. And if everybody remembers, a paramita is taken from two Sanskrit words, para and mita. Mita means action. It's an activity, and para means the literal meaning means the other shore, the other side, as we just chanted in the Heart Sutra, paragate, parasamgate, gone to the other shore. So it's used there, but it's kind of its less literal, more functional meaning means the highest. So this is to embody the paramitas is the highest activity that we can endeavor to do. And as everybody remembers, there's six of them, and we're going to start with the first one, and that is Dana Paramita. And Dana usually gets interpreted or translated as generosity, even though as we go through this, you might see that may not be the best fit. Sanskrit to English is not a very direct method of translation. From what I've read when we do the ancestor talks, apparently Sanskrit to Chinese is even harder. So we're going from Sanskrit to Chinese to Japanese to English. So we've got a couple of layers of translation there. And the word Dana, generosity may not be the greatest translation, but How it's been described is a willingness to give others what they need with joy, without regret, and no expectation of reward. So this isn't just objects, it's not just monetary generosity. This also would include time and attention. Also, it gets translated as a quality of kindness and being generous, a willingness to give. So, I think that encompasses a little bit more than just saying generosity. I think that altruism may be a better translation for the word dana. In that, altruism is defined as a selfless concern for the well-being of others. That sounds like a little bit better fit. But I'm not a linguist. I don't know Sanskrit, so that's just kind of a guess. It's interesting because when I first was taking notes on this, the first thing that occurred to me was there in biology, one debate that has gone on since Darwin is nobody has ever agreed on what level of the organism does natural selection work on. You've got a scientist like Richard Dawkins says it works on a molecular level. It's the genes themselves. You've got the basic ideas of Darwin and Wallace that it functions on the individual organism, and then you've got a guy named Scott Carter Lovejoy who published in the last century, who said that it functions on a population, and that's why birds flock together and fish school together. If you watch a flock of birds evade a predator, they all move as one unit. Very confusing for the predator. But they're not all going to make it. They go into that knowing they're not all going to make it, but they all work together to try and keep the damage to it to a minimum. So I think that there's something biologically inside of us that drives us to be good to our own kind. I think that that has a negative side. I mean, humans evolved to live in bands of 50 to 100 people that were all very, very closely related to each other. And outsiders were carrying diseases you had no immunity for. They were there to steal your water, your food, or your mates. So we tend to have a tribal side to this altruism. And that tribal side is very outmoded. We don't live like that anymore. There's too many of us. So, and that situation was probably starting to happen at the time of the Buddha, at the time that these ideas were codified. So this idea that we're not all in this together is really outmoded and has to kind of be done away with.
Another thing related to that already points to the point of being interconnected.
Yeah.
That's already pointing to that. And through this writing, he talks about that too, right? So you're just, yeah, there you go.
We're in the exact same place. Wright, the author of this book, does a fantastic job explaining this. One of the things he says is, and I'll go ahead and read 2 paragraphs, they'll go by pretty quick. Perfect wisdom, whether related to generosity or any other dimension of life, consists of the realization of emptiness. And it is this teaching that the sutras promulgate from beginning to end. Although emptiness was an infrequently used word in the earliest layers of Buddhist literature, when it did make its appearance as the central concept in the Mahayana sutras, it was defined in terms that were already familiar in the Pali Sutras. Okay, remember when we go through the ancestor talks since the beginning of last year, one of the things that we talked about was when this transition to Mahayana happened. And there was this explosion of writing and philosophical development in Buddhism somewhere between the 5th and 7th centuries in China, when the Pali philosophies came in contact with Taoism. So that's kind of the period we're talking about here. To say that something is empty is to say that it is subject to continual change, that its existence is wholly dependent on factors outside of itself, and that it has no unchanging core or permanent essence. Making that claim, Mahayana Buddhists invoke the basic Buddhist teachings of impermanence, dependent arising, and no self. all things are empty of their own self-established permanent essence because they are always subject to alteration and revision, and because they are composed and defined in terms of what lies outside them. Does that sound familiar to anybody? In different terms, in different languages, we just chanted this. Okay, so nothing exists on its own. Nothing exists by itself. It is all subject to factors outside of its control and dependent on everything else around it. So the perception of giving incorporates the wisdom of emptiness to transform the perspective from which acts of giving occur. When the impermanence, dependence, and insubstantiality of all things are absorbed into one's worldview down to the level of daily comportment, everything changes. A new, non-self-centered identity gradually emerges, one that entails reciprocity with everything that previously seemed to be other than oneself. This identity dissolves previous habits of self-protection and self-aggrandizement, opening the self to others in a connection of compassionate identification. To see how the vision of emptiness transforms thinking about generosity or given, there's a lot of examples in the sutras that we can look at, but think about that for a second. That what they're really driving at with the concept of dana is not necessarily just giving stuff away, but getting to that point where you understand and internalize and realize your own interconnectedness with everything else. So that's kind of a different idea than just generosity. It's this deep-seated understanding that there is no barrier between you and everything else around you. You did not independently arise. None of us did. They were all dependent on what's around us, and we're all constantly interacting with what's around us, and what's around us is constantly changing.
What is it?
I would add to that the idea of covetousness.
I don't think so. Get you the mic.
Microphone.
Yeah.
I would add to that in the context of emptiness, everything being impermanent, ever-changing, insubstantial, etc., the idea of the tendency towards covetousness or possession of things, accumulation of wealth, all begins to turn into nonsense. And so it doesn't make we can't actually have anything, let alone own anything, other than the pathetic 70 years or so that we lived. And then after that, where does it go? So that's the complement to what Shinjin is saying, I think. Interconnectedness, but also on your own, there's no point in trying to have anything. Everything is changing.
The other thing too, Hojo Sensei, thank you for that, is I want you to talk a little bit, because we have some newer people here, about the shift from the three vehicles. He mentioned Hinayana and Mahayana, and that I feel like they need a little bit of background on that, just because we have some newbies. That's essentially what we're talking about, shifting from the view that self and other are separate, and even in the teachings, that you can see that evolving and unfolding throughout. So just you hear that kind of view changing from me, to kind of raising the view to looking at and everything else. So can you give them a little bit of background?
Sure.
On that, Shinjin Sensei?
Yeah. After the Buddha taught his original set of students and followers, and then passed, and the movement took on a life of its own and actually became Buddhism, it underwent several changes, and kind of the first massive schism started to happen somewhere around 2nd, 3rd century BC, was this idea of, how was enlightenment possible, and who was able to do something like that. And Mahayana in India was a very small kind of sect, not a very major school, but as luck would have it, as history would almost at random forces, it these teachings traveled to the west into the region called Bactria, and then were introduced into China via the Silk Road. And the idea they gave birth to what we know as Mahayana Buddhism. The basic idea was that absolutely any sentient being can become a Buddha, provided you do the work that the Buddha did to reach enlightenment. And it was a very radical idea at the time. Hinayana, you have much more of a hierarchy of priests and ascetics, and enlightenment is reserved for someone like that, and not the average person. It's not something the average person would be able to do. And probably the greatest illustration in the Mahayana canon is the sixth patriarch Huineng, who was a woodcutter, uneducated woodcutter, and reached enlightenment the first time he heard somebody chanting a sutra. At least that's what the folklore tells us.
So nobody's special.
Yeah, nobody's special.
It's available to everybody. Yeah,
for everyone,
exactly.
and everything, every sentient being. So that's kind of the idea. And Zen is part of the Mahayana tradition and lineage.
Soteriology or salvation dimension, where Hinayana apparently Hinayana means lesser vehicle, Mahayana means greater vehicle. Hinayana apparently had the view that you can save yourself and you can get yourself out of this circle of life and death and so on. Mahayana said, unless all beings are saved, that's actually impossible. And so the whole idea of salvation comes into play there.
Okay, so another pair of paragraphs from Wright's text, and then we'll open the floor up. Therefore, over and over, the sutras recommend that when the bodhisattva is faced with a beggar, he should produce a thought thus: he who gives, he to whom he gives, and what he gives, in all of these, the own being cannot be apprehended. The bodhisattva's own being cannot be apprehended because they have no own being. They are what they are. What they are depends on a great extent to other beings, and they change over time. Nothing is self-established. Nothing stands on its own. All of us who fail to understand this as donors tend to be more self-concerned in giving than concerned about the other. Understanding ourselves and others as isolated entities, each on our own, in the act of giving, we will likely be as much or more self-promoting than truly generous. So what this is saying is, when at the level of bodhisattva, when you give, you don't see there's no difference between you as the person giving and the person receiving. And I think one thing that has to be acknowledged, I think the first step in acknowledging that process is when you're able to give, that should show you the gifted situation that you're in, that you have something that you can give away. And that alone should break down the barrier between the person giving and the person receiving. One thing that happened to me a couple of years ago that was kind of interesting is I started to get really suspicious of organizations like Goodwill, that you would give things away that you didn't need to. Because you'd go into the Goodwill store and there'd be a bunch of hipsters buying the old clothes, and then somebody, there's 8 or 9 people working there, so somebody's making money off this. And if you've got people that are working day shift on the floor, that means that there's upper level managers that are making an ungodly amount of money off of stuff that people are bringing in and giving away. So I started to really distrust that process. So what I started doing was, when I had enough stuff to give away, I would just make plastic bags, a couple of shirts, socks, whatever it was that I had extra, and then I'd go up here to the Kroger and I'd buy really soft food like Vienna sausages and a couple bottles of water, and I'd go down on Ponce and give it to homeless people. And I remember at the time my girlfriend, she goes, well, I've got all these notebooks and pens. And I'm like, yeah, that's just what they need. But I'll play along. So we threw a couple of notebooks and a couple of pens in each of my hobo bags. And the first guy I handed a bag to opens the bag and he sees this notebook and this pen and he goes, oh man, I love to draw. And I was just like, oh geez, you know, and I just told the guy, I said, well, I'm going to come back out here and find you and I want to see your work. And that was a really powerful moment because, I mean, it really drove home that some of us are in this privileged position to do things like that. And some of us are in less privileged positions where they need that kind of help. And it's not just money, it's not just the physical object, that we also have to give the gift of the Dharma. And that, you know, when we say we respect the three treasures, that we don't withhold from the three treasures, one of the things that we don't withhold is the Dharma. So that when we embody a paramita, or we attempt to embody that virtue, that's one of the things that we have to keep into account. It's like, this is not just about, you know, me handing this book to somebody that may want to need it. It's how am I taking on this virtue, that there is no boundary between me and this homeless person, that we're actually the same thing. It's just I got lucky and he got a little less lucky, you know. And in reality, you know, 6-7 paychecks, I'd be my side. 6-7 paychecks disappear, I'm going to be out there in Ponce myself, waiting for somebody to give me a bag. So with that, we'll open the floor and see what you guys think. How does this concept of dana strike you guys?
I think to expound upon what you just said, though, Mike, I think we have to view, or generosity must apply to everyone. We view wealthy people as though they've somehow escaped old age, sickness, and death. And it also applies to them as well. I mean, we may see someone in need on the road, and it stirs up that need to help, but to share the Dharma would be all people, even the most privileged who live in the gilded, you know, ivory towers. They will also grow old, become sick, and die. And I think that's how our generosity differs than just the immediate need to help someone who's in an obvious state of distress. It applies to everyone, irrespective of socioeconomic status or privilege or comforts in life. All of that is temporal and will go away at some point. In fact, I would assert that the people that have the most to lose.
Yeah, and
it will be the most painful for them to let go of those things. So, yeah, just broadening that idea of generosity. It is that the giving of resources, food, clothing, shelter, but death will come to us all.
right.
I think that's where the generosity of the Dharma is applicable to every person, irrespective of their social status.
I agree completely, and I think that being well off is no guarantee you're not going to have a lot of psychological poverty,
Right.
and emotional poverty. Yeah.
So in thinking about impermanence and giving and letting go, and I all through the week, the talk from last week kept going through my head when she said, hold on to nothing. And then last night I accidentally shattered my favorite cocktail glass, this 1950s Georges Briard, you know, just wonderful glass. And I was just like, okay, yeah, let it go. It's, you know, it is no more. In giving, I think there's special joy in your example of the notebooks. Special joy when it's the perfect fit, when you're able to let go of something and bring it into someone else's lives, that's exactly what they need at that moment. And then third, on the interconnectivity of all of us, I think about one of my favorite films, Harold and Maude, and I can't remember what prompted Maude's comment, but it was something about, people. And she goes, well, they're my species. And I've just always loved that. It's like, yeah, we're all doing this together.
Thank you so much, Sunchi and April, for this discussion. I think generosity is a wonderful topic to start off with, Paramita, because really open our heart to everything. And besides our species, our human kind, that we are having this altruism toward, I think the broader is have generosity and openness and love and kindness to all living beings, creatures, elements all around us. And like, for example, little insects, and with our practice of not to harm and beneficial to all beings, instead of killing them or thinking that they may harm us and get rid of them, or unattentively step on them, or thinking of the future generation with our climate crisis, and we carelessly use our materials for our own well-being or our own satisfaction, like consumptions, clothing, food, and because we think just for us, but not thinking further for our oral earth and future generations, we added to the harm. And so altruism really is a broad subject to talk about. And how do we, with true altruism, how do we live our life with awareness, with knowledge of what is harmful and what is beneficial, and try our best. And of course, we all cause harm, unintentionally. Of course, we one way or another we do because of our life. But with more attention, more awareness, we can limit the harm as much as possible. And so, thank you.
Yeah, I think you've really hit on a lot of important concepts there, because this idea that it does extend far beyond our species is a relatively new idea. I mean, Rachel Carlson published Silent Spring, I think, in 1961, and that was like one of the first times it rose to the public realization that exploitation of the environment, misuse of the environment, it's going to make agriculture impossible. It's going to make human life so that the world wasn't just ours to exploit, that this does have to extend, farther beyond what's immediately in front of you. To dump pesticides in the river to kill a population of mosquitoes is going to affect the fish population downstream, in turn affect the bird population, and eventually going to make things that we depend on, water and agriculture, impossible.
I've thought about generosity through time a lot recently. Like, what do you do with your time? Do we have time? Like, do we have free time? Do we have that? It's funny the good thing about generosity is, like, when you do it, you kind of learn kind of like the absurdity of thinking you own or possess things, and it's good to have. It's like understanding it from multiple angles, that emptiness. You can't really have something, and that time you really wanted, what were you going to do with it? How valuable was it compared to making the long drive out to Gwinnett County for your good friend's baby shower? It's stuff like that. It seems trivial, but like, be generous with your time. and do it, because it really reveals some of those I like those ridiculous layers of ego that we have built up, and that just parts of your personality that you think are super important, that if you're here, you're probably in the belief that it's actually emptiness. But yeah, I used to think I was, like a saint with generosity, and I wasn't a selfless person. But then, I got a little older and realized that there's, also got married too. That plays a big part of it. But yeah, like time, like what is your time? Do you own that time, and is it your free time? And then, I think a big thing to think about is, like, if you were going to have that, whatever you wanted to do, that movie or that scrolling through your phone with that time that you wanted, like, it's fun to think, like, not like Zen meditation, but kind of like your own guided verbal meditation, like, what would that really get me? What was the value in that? And could I have been a little more generous with that time in my day?
I'm glad, Jack, I'm glad you went there, because a part of this discussion too is we like to roll it into the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and that's part of how, Hojo's, has us view the practice, Buddha being our own Zazen, the Dharma being the teaching, and then the Sangha, of course, that's a little bit easier for us to conceive of. But I'm glad you kind of went there about compassion, and what does generosity look like in our personal practice? Like when we're sitting there or looking at the wall, stuff is coming up, or we're getting frustrated and kind of pissed off because we can't get our minds to settle. I mean, does that require patience with ourselves? Does it require giving ourselves room? So what is that? I want to throw that out, and I want to make sure the folks online, if you have something, please just come off of mute. We do not want to make sure we want to include you as well. So I mean, if anyone online has a comment related to that, I'm going to go into gallery mode. Please do share your thoughts and your insights. This is the integrated discussion, but let's kind of look at it from the perspective of practice. What does generosity in practice look like? And Jack kind of went there already, related to time. And does that mean just showing up on a cushion? Does that mean, having compassion with self? Like, what does that look like? Does anybody have any comments on that?
Comment on that before you look forward. It's going to be interesting to say something further about this. Please keep. Sorry. So we often say generosity is a form of compassion, an action that we take through compassionate motives, altruism, and so on. But we also recognize in Zen that compassion sometimes looks like cruelty. Tough love, sometimes smother love, behaving as if you're being compassionate when you're really not helping the situation. Or on the other hand, doing things which look pretty tough on the outside, but they're the most compassionate thing to do in the situation. So it gets into the balance between wisdom and compassion, and that's where the rubber hits the road in practice.
We talked about that last time. Let me remind that wisdom is something that is woven through every single paramita. So it's coming right back up, and I love Shinjin to kind of kick off on what Hojo said as well.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about the paramitas, especially Dana paramita, is they also have they can have a negative side when you misuse them. When you think you're being generous to a point where you're giving so much up, you've got nothing left to do your own work. You're so generous that you're actually harming yourself. And I think Jackie might have alluded at that a little bit. That's when you have to kick in the paramita of wisdom, and we'll talk about that one at length, to know when you're properly using generosity or when you might be misusing it. And you might be misusing to a point where you talked about how you handled things when you were younger. I'm the most generous guy around. I'm doing all these great things, and that's misusing it. That's because that barrier between you and the receiver and the giver only gets reinforced. So yeah, I think that as we go through each of these paramitas, you're going to see this kind of dark shadow of how they can be misused and be used to pump up the ego and reinforce those kinds of barriers. But that's why wisdom is probably the most important of the paramitas. And a lot of people say, well, the paramitas are like fingers on a hand, and, wisdom is the palm that holds them all together. And I've kind of thought a better metaphor was they're all like, you got a bank of faucets, and wisdom is turning on and off the faucets in the proper amount, in the proper mixture. And I think also there may be a situation where, or maybe situations where generosity, or you trying to help somebody, is only going to hold them back and harm them. And that's what Hojo just alluded to with the idea of skillful means. That it may not be the best thing for somebody else just to give them everything they want. I mean, you wouldn't do that with a 3-year-old. You're the adult. You know what. At Christmas time we do, but
It could actually be causing some harm, right?
what's that? Santa gives them everything. We can blame Santa. It just popped into my mind, but I thought it was hilarious. This socialist meme had a picture of Marx, and it said, "If you like fat guys with beards and the color red, boy, have I got a book for you." Yeah, it's a different slant there. But even Gandhi said, he said, "Don't give money to beggars that are healthy enough to work, because you're just harming them in the long run." There may be issues of health that you can't see, like the psychological and emotional stuff we just mentioned. So I don't know how I would apply that directly, but that is something he said. And I think what he was driving at was that, you, by trying to help somebody, you may just be making matters worse. Yeah.
And
So
we've all heard the saying about the cup that's giving from a cup that's empty. And even he says, it all depends on generosity, depends on having something to give, because if you don't have anything in the cup, like, that's not going to help anybody that's thirsty. And then as well as having the capacity to give. So it's like a double-edged sword. You have to have something, and then you have to have the capacity, because if you're on E, that's not helpful to anybody.
right.
Yeah, I guess the thing that comes to mind with this discussion for myself is trying to be aware of, be honest with myself when I'm quote unquote being generous. And I think you alluded to it earlier, like how much is that me just like doing it because, wow, this makes me feel good, versus the actual compassion of it. And I think sometimes I more frequently get deluded that, wow, I'm so great, rather than should.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of understand that as well. One time I was hanging around in front of a club getting ready to do a gig, and a homeless guy walked up, and he was wearing a t-shirt of a band that I used to be in. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. And I said, hey man, where'd you get that? He goes, oh, I just fished it out of the trash. I mean, so, yeah. Yeah, so I was like, oh, geez. Yeah, so, yeah, I think that is something we do have to be on. And is this your first time here? Yes. And what's your name? Jeremy. Okay. Well, thanks for coming by. Thanks for having some insight.
Any other thoughts on Zazen practice and generosity with self? I mean, again, a lot of us come here because we've been beaten up, or we're beating ourselves up, or we're doing it all the time. Can we not just do that in our? What does that look like?
Yeah, actually, I think I have two things. The first one relating back to the story you told of the homeless person who got the notebook and was like, I really love to draw. And I think a lot made me think about how a lot of times we use, when we judge what someone needs, we use that judgment of our expectations. And that puts still us at the forefront. And, it's that line of, am I trying to control the situation, or am I trying to listen to what the other person needs? Instead of, using your expectations, actually looking and putting the other person at the forefront of what they need. Because it might not be what, you expect that they need. It might be something totally different. But the second one, kind of relating back to, how generous should you be, and And you mentioned you don't give everything to a 3-year-old, but I think it's the perfect example of when you're raising a kid, it causes a lot of issues if you just give them everything. Psychologically, when they grow up, they might not be able to handle a lot of situations because they've never been in that role of responsibility if you just give them everything. So, I think those are all.
Well, the first caveat is I've never had kids, so I'm just shooting in the dark
no.
with an idea like that.
But I mean, even myself my dad likes to provide for me, and I'm very grateful for that. But at a certain point, I need to move out of the house, have some responsibility, especially, when I'm getting engaged and married. I need to face the reality of responsibility, so I can apply that to my own marriage before I, have to tackle an issue that I'm never prepared for or encountered before. So.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that.
Appreciate it.
I've actually heard somebody trying to explain to me that that's the reason that Jesus wasn't actually the Messiah, because he never did the single hardest thing someone can do, which is marry somebody and live with them.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think that relationships like that, you really are putting the Dharma into play, in terms of controlling your ego and what your expectations. I mean, expectations in judgment, it's an interesting thing because that's something you pick up and carry around. You're not placing that weight on the other person. Most of the time people don't care one way or the other whether you judged them or not.
Mhm.
You're the one that's got to pick that up and carry that around. And why make your life harder?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a talking stick. Thank you. Yeah, I know all of that. Yeah.
I think it's interesting though, Mike, how you pointed out that these necessarily have a dark side as well, that we can become trapped in them. In the book, The Heart of Being, John Dido Roy points out how you get in these quandaries of being so rigid in our compassion or generosity that it does cause harm. He uses an example of, speaking of like compassion and not wanting to harm, I think perhaps he described a situation when he'd been driving in the forest or a mountain area and hit an animal, and it injured the animal in such a way that it was going to die. But his desire not to harm thought, okay, do I just end the animal's life and allow it to be put out of the misery that it's in? Or am my desire not to harm actually allows that animal to continue to suffer? Like you're trapped.
Actually, this is one of my another really great. Well, I've got my another really great example of that, and this is from the Jakarta stories that I learned from Hojo. That one of the mythical Buddhas was on a boat, and there was a soldier returning home and suffering from PTSD, is what we acknowledge now. At the time, they didn't really understand that. He flipped out, pulled out a sword, and started hacking up people that were close to him. So the Buddha stood up at the back of the boat with a bow and arrow and killed him. And it was a great act of compassion because, for one thing, he kept the situation from getting any worse, because there were a lot of other people on the boat, and also he prevented that guy's karma from getting any worse. So yeah, I think it's such high level judgment.
Yeah.
It's extremely challenging. Extremely challenging.
Discernment, wisdom. Discernment, wisdom. It keeps coming back to that.
Yeah, and it's interesting you ask, how does this relate to Zazen? How does this relate to sitting? And we get that process where the amygdala starts to get constricted and the bonds in our brain and the prefrontal cortex get stronger and stronger. So we're making more decisions based on higher level brain functions, cause and effect, ethics, morality, things like that, than we are having these gut level reactionary emotional responses that happen so fast that it's really tough to get in touch with. So I think that's the sitting with the connection to Zazen. The more you sit, the longer you sit throughout your life, the brain begins to function a little differently, and you're able to do a better job with a decision like, okay, I've got this wounded deer that I just hit, you know, instead of having these emotional reactions, oh my God, I can't handle this, I'm just gonna get in the car and run off, you know. And it doesn't seem very compassionate. It's like, okay, this suffering animal, one whack with a tire iron and the suffering ends, and that's thinking it, or not even thinking, it's being at a higher level. And we each have the choice to do that in any situation that we get in. It just takes us a long time to realize that we are making you make a choice to get angry. You make a choice to lose your temper, even though we don't realize it. But through the practice of Zazen, it becomes less and less likely.
Space.
You buy yourself the time to respond instead of just react.
And then I'm going to ask for some folks online just to give a pause to make sure they.
Just one more point on the Jataka tale. Buddha also was willing to take on the karma of killing the other person. And so in all these cases, we have to be willing to take on that karma. And we had a cat die over a weekend because he had a decline, brought him home from the vet. He wasn't going to get any better. And I wish I knew how to kill him. I didn't know how to kill him, mercifully. And I guess I could have broken his neck or something, but I just didn't know how to do it where I had the confidence to do it. And so that's another.
Thank you very much. Definitely, Jeremy. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, email. All right. I want to allow time and space for folks that are online. I see John and Alan and Ungun. Please, if you'd like to have a comment, please come off of mute. Corolla, Blair, anyone, please do share. We welcome your feedback and your input. Okay, yep, John, go ahead.
Thank you, Sensei, for a very interesting and, for me, stimulating talk today. Because of a career in business, I'm going to make a couple of comments related to what I'd call big business and generosity. And it comes inside the context of the interdependent, codependent arising, this ebb and flow, wealthy one day, on the street the next. I'll share a personal experience. I am a fan of goodwill. I think that's a wonderful distribution system that has been orchestrated, like the Waffle Houses, to have brick and mortar locations where I can drop off all of my stuff that I've outgrown or is no longer useful. And there, working in the store is a group of people who can help me find my size, things that I like, and all kinds of appliances, kitchen items. And typically I'll leave with a couple of shirts that have been worn and tested to be durable because, should I stop? I see a hand being raised. I'm not sure what that means.
There you go.
Okay, John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the good point is I can tell by your body language and how animated you are that you've got a great comment. Bad news, you've been on mute this entire time.
Oh.
So back up and roll it again if you don't mind.
Hey, John, get yourself, hit mute again.
How's that? Is that it? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Somebody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay,
Uh,
okay.
I
Okay,
heard,
good.
I heard you before,
Oh,
and
okay.
I very much appreciate what you had to say. So at least some of us heard you.
Okay. Hey, I'll try to make this second version much more condensed. Um, I'm coming here from a career in business, and I'm filtering these comments inside of these perceptions and experiences of interdependency, flow, rise and fall, wealth and poverty. I'm a fan of goodwill. I think they are the Waffle House of flow and distribution. As a fan, I drop my stuff off, not worrying about trying to find anybody who has the same size or needs that I have. And I typically leave with a couple of shirts, a couple of pair of pants that I'm pleased did not give more money to China. China's okay, but I'm just trying to lighten up with my dependency on China. And also they're typically been tested by being worn, and it's pretty clear that they still look good even after one generation of wear. So, and as I look around, those people are all typically in job training programs. Goodwill has a major mission out there in terms of helping people training. And I just honor the fact that they make it so easy for me to drop stuff off and buy quote, gently used stuff. Enough of that. I'm sitting here resonating with wealth, and the people that come to mind, and I'm putting this out kind of as a counterpoint. I welcome your response, but I think of Andrew Carnegie, who made this. I thought it was hard to make money. It's so much harder to give it away. And he settled on building libraries all over the country. We've got one in Newnan, Georgia. And I think of Ray Kroc, who passed away, and his widow. I hear it on Georgia radio. The widow constantly sponsoring these programs for education. Locally, the elementary school teachers are constantly getting grants through the Bill Gates Foundation. And I ask, how the hell does a man in Seattle reach out all over the country into Carrollton, Georgia, and deliver 2,000 here and 5,000 there with elementary school supplies? And I only put that out there because that word wealth to me has always been a little bit tarnished, but there does seem to be a cycle here. I notice that as these wealthy concentrations arise, quite often they're dispersed in ways that seem to be helpful. I'll stop there.
Thank you, John.
Okay, Bill has his hand up.
Okay, a question and then a comment. Earlier, you said that someone said that you shouldn't give money to people that are able to work. Who said that?
Say it again, Sensei.
Mahatma Gandhi said that.
Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, I couldn't understand you. Okay. This
Experiments
is
with truth.
we are about to send solicitation letters out for money for the coming year for our Sangha here in Jacksonville. And it's been my experience over 3 or 4 different outfits I've sat with that quite often solicitations for money get hidden in some sort of philosophical analysis of what the word dana means. I try to keep those two very separate. I might talk about, yeah, we want your time and we want your effort and we want, but then the last thing, but don't forget, we need money. Now, I don't know why people are so afraid to ask for money, particularly if you're a practice leader, but I'd like to get your feelings on that, Shinjin. And thank you very much for this topic. It's very timely.
Feelings about it other than if we don't get money, we can't keep the doors open. It's that simple. Yeah. So, I mean, that's it's a different aspect of Dana. If we don't have money coming in the door, we can't keep the lights on and we can't keep our abbot fed. So, those things need to happen.
I'm missing a lot of meals.
And Hojo just said you can tell he's missing a lot of meals just by looking at him, just so you couldn't hear him. So, but I think that's right. Ungen brings up a good point because, I think, especially in Zen, or in Buddhism in general, it's kind of looked down upon to ask for, to say we need resources. But I feel like it's important for us to understand that those are the things that enable us to be able to do what we're doing right now. We have residents because we have people that are supporting us. We have teachers because we're able to provide for them to be able to keep doing that. So, I mean, I feel like, Ungen, you bring up such a valid point. And you hear me all the time. I don't shy away from it. I see you, Shikaku. I don't shy away. Y'all hear me saying that all the time. I'm like, and also, if you find value in what we are doing, please contribute and support, because that is such a critical part of bringing and enabling the Dharma. And then also creating a space for the Sangha to practice as a part of generosity. So let me let Shikak, I'm gonna go on mute right quick. We just so you're on knowledge that the TV speaker is not enabled, and the only way for me to do that is to turn the meeting off. So I'm not gonna do that. So you hear me muting us and then turning up the speaker here. So just give me a second. I'm gonna mute us, and then Shikak, you go ahead and speak.
Okay. Shinjin Sensei, let me ask you this. Following your comments about goodwill, could the same thing be said about ASZC? I see people running around. I give lots of money. Why don't I just take and preach the Dharma on the streets? So how might that be different? I don't see a difference. So I want to likewise push back on you about that, particularly as treasurer.
Yeah. I'll meet you out back anytime you want. No, I think what came across as me slamming Goodwill as an organization, I think a better way for me to put that is I was looking for a more direct experience. I was looking for a situation to give things away that I didn't need to someone who did need them in the most direct way possible, so that it wouldn't be dependent on somebody's salary. There wouldn't be people who didn't need the clothes taking them. I was just looking for the most direct method I could. And like I said, I also filled the bags up with food that I thought they'd be able to eat. They're usually not in a great situation with dental health, so you can't just give them anything. But yeah, I didn't mean so much slam on Goodwill, because I honestly don't know how they run their organization, as much as I was trying to say I was looking for a much more direct experience. And how I would translate that to what we do here is, I come into the Zen Center and I see all these people running around, and I give you guys money. I'm not sure where that money is going. I would say just keep sitting, because that's the most direct experience we can possibly have. And that's really what we're providing. I mean, the money is going to have a room where we can all sit together, and we all know that sitting with a group of people is a completely different experience than sitting by yourself or just going out and preaching the Dharma on the sidewalk, even though going out and preaching the Dharma on the sidewalk may be a really interesting exercise. Let me know what happens if you try that. Yeah, that would be my response.
We'll come and bail you out.
Yeah.
I did want to say, when Achak Rinpoche was here, he's one of the Dalai Lama's posse. He looked around and he said, providing a conducive place for practice is dana. And he said, but in Tibet, everything is white, so we like a little more color.
Sikak, do you have any comment, follow up on that?
Yes, we are always seeking donations to keep the organization running, including our teacher supported. So Apriel Fusatsu, I'm going to do it this time. There is never enough. We have enough to stay alive and we are doing well, but there's never enough. So thank you for not just your donations, but more broadly for the entire dana that we offer to the Sangha. Thank you.
We kind of already did this. We went into the area of generosity and practice of the Dharma, the allowing us to have this conversation, our teachers bringing the Dharma to us, our teachers writing books. So what other ways would generosity in the Dharma look like? Go ahead, Homo.
Generosity springs forth simultaneously with the need. And I mean, certainly asking for the way, but we
Is it on? Is it on? Is it green? Is it light green? There you go. Yeah.
Okay. My observation is that the generosity just naturally arises, like compassion. When you see someone in need, it just springs forth. It's not something you conjure. It happens. And I think similarly with generosity, I mean, you feel a connection to a community. And at least for me, there's the natural desire to contribute in the way that I can. It's certainly asking for directly is perfectly sound, but I think these things, they just come of their own.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think about the thought though that if somebody that has not experienced generosity within their growing up, their involvement or unfolding, sometimes unless you don't see that, it can innately arise. But sometimes I feel like you have to have some experience with it to know what it is, to know that sometimes you have to contribute that way. I feel like you have to see it. Sometimes you have to verbalize that you need it, because if you don't say, if we don't tell you what we need, then maybe you wouldn't know that you could contribute. So I feel like, yes, it naturally arouses, but I feel like it has to be nurtured, and sometimes it has to be taught. So
Well, I appreciate what Bill said though, like deep diving into the philosophy of like generosity to become like mental gymnastics. If you need to keep the lights on and the heat on and the air conditioner on, we need this much a month, like, to keep the place going. That's a legitimate ask, but I think more like I think these things arise of their own.
no, it's great.
Maybe they don't.
Hold on, Corolla. I have a Corolla. I see your hand, and then we will let Pearl go.
I think that was a wonderful comment. And the story that comes to mind with me is Bodhidharma and the Emperor, where for new people, Bodhidharma was the first Chinese patriarch. And the emperor came to him and said, I have built all these monasteries and temples. How much merit have I accrued? And Bodhidharma says, absolutely none. So generosity for the sake of being generous is I mean, it's very good that you give something, But if it isn't something that arises merely out of recognition of what needs to be done, rather than thoughts of, as Joseph Campbell used to say, what a good boy am I, then you're not really cultivating your practice. You're doing a good deed, and that's nice, but you're not truly cultivating your Zen practice. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
until something happens that's transformational, then you haven't done the work.
Pearl?
Yeah, I agree with compassion and generosity is someone could be innate and someone could be grown up in an environment that exposed to and they get used to doing that, as well as someone that haven't been exposed to and being taught how to do it step by step. And I remember a teacher told me, like, even when someone asked to put, like in one hand, put money into the other hand, like giving, and that action put from one hand to another hand or giving to someone as a practice still, it's difficult for someone to release that, to give away. And the Dalai Lama, he said that generosity or compassion, we practice it until it's become not like thinking that you have to give, but it's profusing naturally come out of you. And it's like a koan. I forgot the name of the two brothers. One brother asked the other that, what would Kuan Yin or Avalokiteshvara with hundreds of arms, what would they, like, how can they do that compassion? And the other brother said, it's like at the night when the pillow come out, you just know instantly to put the pillow back. And it's like something that naturally and automatically after practice, that it become innate inside and just naturally you know just what to do in that moment. And one way to practice doing that I learned from Bernie Glassman, who's well known to peace work. There's 3 tenets, and the first one is not knowing. Is when we arise in a situation, we see something need to get done, but we don't think that we know how to fix or what to do. We kind of trying to look at overall and really understand the situation. And the second thing is bearing witness, is that we are here not to helping someone or not to fixing, but bear witness so that we, being with that suffering, we could feel it and allow us enough time and space to really arise the wisdom, knowing what to do. And then the last step is compassionate action. Is after we not knowing, after we learn and bearing witness to feel, then in that moment, we know exactly what feels right in the moment, that the next moment may not right. So that moment, we will have the faculties and the wisdom to know what to do appropriately for that moment. And kind of summarizing this, I remember one quote from, forgot what's the name, but it say, fixing is when you see the world is broken. Helping is when you see someone is hopeless, is weak. And serving is when you see the world is whole. And so it's kind of that really remind me of, how do we serve the world to become a better place for all of us, not just for me or for the other person, but together, not separating us, but how do we live this world so that we serve each other and not hoping or fixing.
Thank you, Pearl.
Thank you.
Any response to that? Mr. Hojo?
No, that was perfect as is. And I've got nothing to add.
And just as as always, a part of the community practice discussion, I always like to bring in some comments from either Hojo or Matsuoka or Okamura. And one of the things that Matsuoka Roshi talks about is the first charity asks that you realize that the essence of human life is mutual aid, and that you give yourself give of yourself as well as your passions. Giving is not just the contribution of money, although this is an important part of it. It means the practice of benevolence, love, compassion, virtue, so that others will be inspired by your example and spirit. And I think, Pearl, that kind of really encompasses what you just said too. And as we talked about generosity through our Zazen, through Dharma, and then through Sangha, I think that's exactly what it is. It's coming back to us supporting. Yeah, we can give our money, we can give our time, we can come in and clean the building, we can, leave our residents things. But really, what does that look like? And I think that's going to be different for everybody. And as Pearl, you just got through talking about, we use our own wisdom and our own discernment to kind of figure out what needs to be done in that moment.
And these are urges that have always been with us as long as we've been human. And I know a couple of Dharma talks, Neanderthals came up, but one of the things that they notice in all Neanderthal skeletons, because their hunting methods were so brutal, that they're all super banged up, lots and lots of injuries by the time they die. And that without intervention from the rest of the tribal unit, none of them would have survived. So this has been with us as long as we've been human. This not an urge for altruism, but a need for altruism, a need for compassion. It's one of the things that makes us human.
We want to hear.
Yeah. If we were to hear a baby cry in distress, we would all respond immediately without ever having been taught to act compassionately. It would just rise up in us. Or to see someone injured. I think, as you said, that natural inclination, it's in our nature to help. And so I don't think it has to be taught. I think it has to be nurtured and noticed. Again, we would all respond viscerally if we hear a baby cry in distress. We would know. There's a knowing there. I think that precedes thought.
That's what you're talking about, the interconnectedness that is beyond the teaching aspect of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's a nurture experience also. Notice.
Again, Sangha, any other thoughts online? Again, I just always like to have the pause because I want to make sure we're including everyone out in the ethers as well as actually in the room. I think we're good. So let's do this. So, let me check Facebook. Yeah, it's like a lot going on here as always. But what I would love for you to do is over this next month and a half, because in February, we actually have our community practices, our community poetry share, but we'll be back in March to talk about the next Paramita. But look at each of your lives and your situations and see what arises. And what we'll do is do a check-in at the beginning of our discussion to see if anything arose from this discussion or just kind of letting it marinate. We always like to say it marinates or steeps, and then what comes up. And if you would be willing to share anything that comes up would be great, because that's what's useful as a Sangha, is hearing direct experience with what each of us, because it's going to be different, has with the Paramitas, because we're continuously, all we ever do is we have aspirations for our practice. And how does that support it? By the Sangha, our Zazen, and our teaching. So that would be very helpful. So let me just pause to see if there's any other. Sure. Yeah.
Could you clarify what you said in February?
Sure. Yeah, and I will. Yes. So in February we will. We started it last year as a community poetry share, and it's an opportunity to either share your own personal works, or also to share some works that inspired you. You can share others as long as you give folks their credit for what they wrote, and then we circle up. We have an opportunity to listen and really hear, and then at the end we'll have a discussion about the things that arose. So we'll be taking a break from this, but we'll come right back in March to talk about Paramitas. We kind of mix it up, So that's an opportunity for sharing as well. All right,
Yeah.
I just want to check Facebook. Go ahead.
And the paramita for March will be Sila, or morality. So Sila paramita in March.
Nope, I think let me see comments yet. All right, so. Yes, okay, so thank you, Zemai. Zemai says, remember this, give someone a fish, feed them for a day, teach them to fish, and you've fed them for life. And then Zemai says, I wish that our society would embrace compassionate suicide versus for terminally ill. And then we have a question from Janice. How does generosity without ego translate to receiving? I'm often eager to give, but reluctant to receive. That's always a good one, because we're givers, but how do, as a part of generosity, do we learn to receive?
Are you the same person now that you were when you started the practice? That's how I would answer that. Are you the same, you know, how to receive? Or when you started the practice, when you received the gift of this practice, have you changed since you've been doing this?
And so Janice, we'll leave you with that thought and maybe come back next time to see if anything fell out of that for you. But Sangha, as always, we are so grateful for the opportunity to come together and practice in discussion, and again, to really look at how what we learn, what we do, and it's all interconnected. So as always, you heard Shikak say what I normally say every week. In order for us to do this, we are supported by our Sangha here and at large. So again, if you found value in what we do, please consider giving. And we do, for upcoming week, we have practice every single day. We have AM and PM meditations. We have it, here at 6, and then also online at 6:30 every evening. We have book clubs, our Cloud Dharma starting up back this Tuesday, and as well as we have Shinjin Sensei talking with our ancestor talk next week. You know what you're talking about?
Yeah, it'll be we're going back to China, and it's going to be post Huining, but pre Bodhidharma.
So always good things arising. As always, again, we are so grateful for each and every single one of you, of utmost for your presence and also for your practice, because that's what really works and makes an effort in the world. So, any other comments or questions? We're good. All right, so what we'll do is we'll do our ending Dharma verses, and we'll be kick off. But thank you so much for our first discussion for the year.
Yeah. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it.
Again, as always, Sangha, be safe, be well. God shall have a great rest of the week. We're here for practice opportunities. We hope you join us. Have a good day.